Gray Man, the Boogeyman, Werewolf of Wisteria, the Brooklyn Vampire, and Moon Maniac. Born on May 19th, 1870 in Washington, D.C., Hamilton Howard Fish, or better known as Albert Fish, was an American serial killer that spread fear across the entire eastern half of the United States for nearly an entire decade. This is his story. Born from Randall and Ellen Fish, Albert Fish was the youngest of three siblings, Walter, Annie, and Edwin. The Fish family line had a well-documented history of mental illnesses. His uncle was diagnosed with mania, a brother was confined in a state mental hospital, and his sister, Annie, was diagnosed with a mental affliction. On October 19th, 1875, at Washington's 6th Street Station, Randall Fish died of a heart attack. Shortly after Randall's passing, with financial hardship on the way, Ellen Fish put her youngest child, Hamilton, into St. John's Orphanage in Washington, where he was frequently abused. During Hamilton Howard's time at St. John's Orphanage, he decided to take his deceased sibling's name, Albert. After 5 long years of abuse at St. John's Orphanage, Albert began to enjoy the physical pain that the constant abuse and beatings brought. He later remarked,
"I was there till I was nearly 9, and that's when I got started wrong. We were unmercifully whipped. I saw boys doing things they should not have done."
At age 12, Albert Fish began a homosexual relationship where he was introduced to the practices and enjoyments of urolagnia. Fish was frequently found entering public restrooms where he would watch boys undress and urinate. He spent most of his weekends there. Around the same time, he would write obscene letters to women, whose information he acquired from matrimonial agencies and public advertising. Before entering the age of 20, Albert Fish moved to New York City, where his mother arranged a marriage with Anna Mary Hoffman. They had 6 children in total: Albert, Anna, Gertrude, Eugene, John, and Henry Fish. Throughout the 1890s, Fish worked as a house painter, while continuing to molest and rape young boys, mostly younger than the age of 6. Around this time, an unknown male lover took Fish to a waxworks museum, where Fish suddenly became obsessed with sexual mutilations. In 1903, Fish was convicted of grand larceny and incarcerated for 3 years in the Sing Sing Correctional Facility. Around 1910, while working in Wilmington, Delaware, Fish met 19-year-old Thomas Kedden, where the couple quickly began a sadomasochistic relationship with each other. The details of whether Albert Fish forced Thomas Kedden into these activities is unknown. Albert later confessed that Kedden was intellectually disabled. Fish ended up taking Thomas Kedden to what he explained as an old farmhouse, where Kedden was tortured. The torture lasted a total of 2 weeks. After the 14 days of pure agony, Albert confessed to cutting off half of Kedden's penis and quoted,
"I shall never forget his scream, nor the look he gave me."
Fish wrapped his trophy in a Vaseline-covered handkerchief, left a $10 bill next to Kedden's feet, kissed Kedden goodbye, and left.
"Took the first train I could get back home. Never heard what became of him, or tried to find out."
In January of 1917, Fish's wife left him for a handyman named John Straub, taking just about every possession the family owned and leaving Albert to raise his children alone. During this time, Albert Fish began having extreme auditory hallucinations and claiming to be following the instructions of John the Apostle. Around this time is when Fish began indulging in self-harm practices, where he would embed needles into his groin and abdomen. X-rays later revealed that Fish had 29 needles lodged into his pelvis. Fish also claimed that he would constantly strike himself with a nail-studded paddle and insert into his anus a wool doused in flammable liquid and set it aflame. While there being no reports or evidence of Fish physically abusing his children, Fish would encourage his children and their friends to also strike him with the same nail-studded paddle. Reports later from his children claimed that around this time is when they noticed their father would consume raw meats and sometimes forcibly serve it to them at dinner. In 1919, Fish stabbed a mentally disabled boy in Georgetown, Washington, where his primary victims consisted of the mentally handicapped or African Americans. His reasoning was,
"These people would not be missed."
Fish continued to torture, mutilate, and murder young children with his implements of hell, which consisted of a meat cleaver, butcher knife, and a small handsaw. July 11th, 1924. Fish found an 8-year-old child named Beatrice Keel on a family farm in Staten Island. Fish offered the child money to come and help look for rhubarb. Luckily, Beatrice's mother saw Fish and chased him away immediately off the property. It was around this time that Fish was suffering massive psychotic episodes and full-blown psychosis. He claimed that God was commanding him to torture and sexually mutilate children. Fish's first attempt to test his implements of hell was on a child he had previously been molesting named Cyril Quinn. Quinn and his friend were playing boxball on a sidewalk in New York when Fish invited the children into his home for some lunch. While the two boys were wrestling and playing on Fish's bed, they accidentally dislodged the mattress and discovered his implements of hell. They were one of the few to escape the grasps of the Gray Man. On May 25th, 1928, Fish saw a classified ad that read, "Young man, 18, wishes position in country. Edward Budd, 406 West, 15th Street." A few days later after reading the ad, 58-year-old Fish visited the Budd family in Manhattan under the impression of hiring Edward. In a later confession, Fish planned on mutilating Edward and leaving him to bleed to death. Fish introduced himself to the Budd family as a farmer from Farmingdale, New York, named Frank Howard, promising to hire Budd and his friend Willie. When Fish returned, he later met Edward's younger sister, Grace. It was at this time he chose his intended victim to be her and not her brother, Edward. Quickly after Fish first met Grace, he made up a story about having to attend a niece's birthday party. Fish later convinced Grace's parents to let Grace accompany him to the party that evening. That was the last time any of the Budd family ever saw Grace. In November 1934, an anonymous letter was sent to the Budd family, which later led the police to Fish. Miss Budd was illiterate and was unable to read the letter, so she asked her eldest son to read it for her. This is what the letter read in full.
My dear Mrs. Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a hand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco to Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and 2 others went ashore and got drunk. When they returned, the boat was gone. At that time, there was a famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the very poor that all children under 12 were sold to the butchers to be cut up and sold for food, in order to keep others from starving. A boy or a girl under 14 was not safe in the street. You could go in any shop and ask for steak, chops, or stew meat. Part of the naked body of a boy or girl would be brought out, and just what you wanted cut from it. A boy or girl's behind, which is the sweetest part of the body and sold as veal cutlet, brought the highest price. John stayed there so long he acquired the taste for human flesh. On his return to New York, he stole 2 boys, one 7, one 11, took them to his home, stripped them naked, tied them in a closet, then burned everything they had on. Several times a day he spanked them, tortured them to make their meat good and tender. First he killed the 11-year-old boy because he had the fattest ass and of course the most meat on it. Every part of his body was cooked and eaten except head, bones, and guts. He was roasted in the oven, all of his ass, boiled, broiled, fried, and stewed. The little boy was next. Went the same way. At that time, I was living at 409 East 100th Street, near Right Side. He told me so often how good human flesh was, I made up my mind to taste it. On Sunday, June 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street. Brought you pot cheese and strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. On the pretense of taking her to a party, you said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When I was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run down the stairs. I grabbed her, and she said she would tell her mama. First, I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook it, and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was, roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not fuck her, though I could had I wished. She died a virgin.
Police investigated the letter. Although the famine in Hong Kong could not be verified, the part of the letter concerning the murder of Grace was found to be very accurate, though it was impossible to confirm whether or not Fish actually ate the parts of Grace Budd due to a lack of technology. The letter was delivered in an envelope that had a small hexagonal emblem with the letters NYPCBA, or known as New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. The appointed chief investigator for the Albert Fish case was William F. King. During his questioning, Fish made 0 attempts to deny the murder of Grace Budd, claiming that he meant to go to the house to kill Grace's brother Edward. Fish later claimed to his attorney that, while kneeling on Grace's chest and strangling the girl, he did have 2 involuntary ejaculations. This information was used at trial to make the kidnapping be sexually motivated, thus no mention of cannibalism. The trial for the murder of Grace Budd was held on March 11, 1935, in White Plains, New York. Fish's defense counsel was James Dempsey, a former prosecutor and the one-time mayor of Peeks Hill, New York. After 10 days of court, Albert Fish pleaded insanity and claimed to have heard voices from God telling him to kill children. Several psychiatrists testified about Fish's many sexually profound fetishes, but Dempsey noted that Fish was a psychiatric phenomenon. After the trial and hearing ended, the jurors found Fish to be sane and guilty. Judge Frederick P. Close ordered the death sentence. On January 16, 1936, Albert Fish was executed and pronounced dead at 11:11 p.m. At a meeting with reporters after the execution, Fish's lawyer said that he had Albert Fish's final statement, which was several pages that Fish wrote hours before his death. But, no matter how pressed Dempsey was, he refused to release the handwritten letters stating, "I will never show it to anyone. It was the most filthy string of obscenities that I have ever read."